Good evening, friends. I hope you can hear that bird in the background. We're sitting over here in the J.C. Ralston Arboretum on the southwest end of the campus of North Carolina State University. We're here to visit those who come on every Saturday morning to bring you what is known now so popularly as Weekend Gardener, Ann Clapp and Mike Raley. We're going to meet and talk with them in just a few seconds.
Sponsored in part by Wachovia, helping North Carolina people realize their financial goals since 1879. And through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV.
Dear friends, it's great to see you sitting out here in this beautiful place, and I'm just delighted to get a chance to have a little talking with two of you who do so much for all of us green thumbers. Now here it is, the last week of March. What are the do's and don'ts, Ann? What are the first things that comes to mind? I'm going out to work my yard this Saturday afternoon.
Well, the first thing to do is go out and enjoy it. That's the first part of gardening. And the next place to start is looking at what you can take care of. As the Tar Heel gardener used to say, never plant more than your wife can take care of. And there's something to be said for that. But it's the time of year when plants are waking up, and so we're doing a little bit of pruning and a little bit of fertilizing, and in this day and age making sure that plants are mulched well so that we don't have to worry about water.
Mike, where did you learn all that you gotten to be an expert, and you were a major in political science?
I'm not sure, Dr. Friday, that I have learned that much. I have done this show for 21 years and had the best gardeners in North Carolina, Irv Evans, Ann, and the late Lewis Howe, and Tony Avent. So many have helped me and been on the show, but I think about the questions that the callers come up with, and some of them I really can't answer. And so, but I was taught by some of the great broadcasters in North Carolina too, and they taught me to, if you don't know what you're talking about, just keep your mouth shut, or at least try and sound like you know what you're talking about, and that served me pretty well.
Well, you've attracted a huge audience in Central North Carolina. I know we have viewers in the east, on the coast, and in the mountains, but we're all people motivated at springtime, and here we are, and the summer season's not far behind. I was up on top of Grandfather Mountain yesterday, and I was looking out. No spring yet, but we live in a perfectly wonderful state, don't we, Ann?
It is a beautiful state from the mountains to the sea, and it has a marvelous agriculture tradition in this state. It's kind of interesting. We had a presence of the textile industry in North Carolina, and we had presence of agriculture, and both of them are still here, but in very much changed guise. And I think the agriculture industry is looking at what's going on in the field of decorative or ornamental horticulture. A lot of the tobacco farmers are growing cut flowers now. We're number 2 in the nation in the growth of poinsettias for the Christmas trade. So the state of North Carolina, from the mountains that are growing the apples for us, and the Christmas trees, and the coastal areas that are the natural habitat of some of our water plants that are now such a popular part of the gardening trade. Everybody wants carnivorous plants. And their home is the eastern part of North Carolina. So just a tremendous diversity of plant material in the state.
Mike, as I ride about the state, I see all these wonderful plantings. You drive down to the Outer Banks, 64 between Plymouth and Manteo, just one beautiful color span. This was born when Janelle Moore started that Make North Carolina Beautiful program, was it not, in those days?
I believe so, Dr. Friday, and we're so lucky along our interstates to have wildflowers. That's one of the things that keeps me busy, besides trying to figure out where I'm going, is to look at the flowers and the different types, and that's one of the way I learned about things. I had a program director years ago tell me as you're driving to work, look at what's around you, and then talk about that on the program. And that works pretty well.
When you two sit down together on Saturday morning, what rehearsing do you do, or what's the preliminary before you go to work?
Mike's there running all of these dials and saying words that we don't repeat on the air.
It's a mad dash. It's a real mad dash. There's no rehearsal.
There's no rehearsal at all. We just go in and start talking like friends as we're doing.
Then the telephone starts to ring, and you ever get a really angry caller?
One thing that we have always strived to do is to tell people that we are one show on WPTF that has no controversy. We don't want controversy. We want to relax and talk to our audience, our friends, and that's about it, and help them and educate them if possible.
But there are some mornings when we get to the point where we've said the same thing 10 times and they still don't understand it. And both of us have to go back to our teaching experience and say, okay, now what is it that we didn't get across in quite the way we should have? But we managed to do it, and we're still speaking.
We have never had an argument that I recall, and I don't know if you've ever really disagreed with. Maybe you just don't say it on the air.
I don't see how you can argue about beauty and plants.
Well, you might be surprised.
We get into controversies occasionally with some of our.
We have different opinions on things.
We have different opinions,
But at least you
and
don't get postcards like one person wrote into the television station saying, "Mister, ain't you got but one necktie?"
I think you have beautiful neckties.
That's surveillance. I heard you was talking a lot about pruning last week. Something you said about camellia bush gotten 6 feet tall. Good gracious.
I whacked off about 6 feet of it, and there are times when people who are gardeners go out and something has grown too quickly, it's out of scale with everything else, and so you start looking for how do you prune it, and sometimes the only thing to do is to make it shorter than it is and get it back in scale with everything else. And that's one of the marvelous things about camellias. They are very forgiving plants. They're like roses. You can cut and lop on them and they come back and do very nicely. I grow a lot of mine up in trees just because I like the shape of them, I like the bark, I like the leaves. And they occasionally get too large for their space, and so you go out, take the top of it off and get it back in order. So as John Harris used to say, the best time to prune is when your pruning shears are sharp. And that's
Mike, you have a flower garden and a food garden at your house?
If you would call tomato plants and maybe a cucumber plant here and there a food garden, yes, I do, as a matter of fact. But and I'm not a big fan of tomatoes.
I didn't think you even ate them.
Well, once in a while I do, but we grow them when we can. My wife and I are pretty busy with school-age children, and so we don't get a chance to do fun things like that always.
They'll come though.
Yes.
You'll have another shot at it.
So I'm told.
Well, you've got one graduating from Carolina this year.
I do indeed, in May. Very proud of her.
Yes.
You talk about raised plant beds every once in a while. What do you mean?
That means getting the plants up to the level that you are, for one thing.
Really?
One of the reasons that a lot of people are using raised beds is as we get a little bit older, it's harder to stoop down and do things. And so if you put it up in a container of some kind, you can get to it to tend it, take care of it. The other thing is in this part of North Carolina, we have a rather heavy, hard clay soil. And so we raise beds. If we don't put a container around it, we at least raise the soil above the natural level of the land with mulch and materials to give us a better root system on some of our plants and to manage the moisture in the soil.
I heard Bob Slocum talking the other day. He's at the Forestry Association, and also the Commissioner of Agriculture when we were talking with him. People are beginning to worry about the loss of forest land and too much. We're not disciplining ourselves. Is this something you hear, Mike, all the time? You watch it?
I do. I am concerned about that. I'm concerned about how much nitrogen we put on our landscape and how little water we actually have. I think we found out in North Carolina, especially in the Triangle area this past year, how little water we really have. And when we start cutting down the trees and using nitrogen to keep our fescue lawns going and using up all that water to keep it healthy, then we're going to be in big trouble one of these days.
you preach this gospel too, Ann, quite often about the absolute essentialness of maintaining adequate water, not too much, but
not too much, but a plant, and particularly that first year that it's in your garden, has got to be watered and taken care of, because it's got to develop a root system, it's got to develop a top system, and the water supply is what allows that to happen. I think people have got to decide how they want their landscape to look, and if you want lots of fescue lawn, that's great, but you're going to have to cut down on your water use somewhere else in order to be able to do that. And I love being in Raleigh, in the city of oaks, but people who are trying to grow things under an oak tree are fighting a losing battle, because there's enough water in that soil for either the oak tree or something underneath it. In most cases, not for both of them.
I've always tried to grow plants in my landscape that will survive droughts. If something dies, I just don't grow that plant again, or I find out a better way to grow it. And I think that's helped me a great deal over the years. And I still have plants surviving, and I also try to have something blooming year round. It helps my morale.
Well, it's true too, isn't it, Mike, that the weather patterns in our state permit that you can, if you really pay a little bit of attention, you can have a flower facing you, or some shrub or some bush year round.
I do, any month of the year, and even when we have so-called normal temperatures in this state, we can still have some things blooming year round.
I think there have been very few years, and 1986 was one when we had that minus 10 degree weather, and that did kill a lot of our color back. But there's something pretty in color, and there's something that's fragrant in our yards in this area, and I think that's one of the things that makes North Carolina people so easy to live with. You can't help but be in a better frame of mind when you're in this kind of lovely environment.
Every time I look around now as I ride around, and I know in my own yard, here comes the mulch. How much mulch is proper? Or is this the season that you do it?
A few inches.
Why do you do it now?
Well, the soil is starting to warm up, and you want to keep the soil cool for roots, and you want to keep the moisture in the soil that accumulates, well, in most years, accumulates over the winter. And that, if you keep mulch up 2 to 3 inches, it's great. And the one thing I think that bothers me about mulch is seeing people who are putting this stuff piled up around trees to 14 or 16 inches. And I want to get out of my car and get my rake out of the trunk and get everything back, because you're allowing insects and all kinds of varmints to get in and disintegrate the bark on trees. That's not a good habit.
Looks pretty, but it's not the right thing to do.
That's not good horticultural practice.
Yeah. With things like roses, for instance, it's a good time of year to get rid of the old mulch that has diseased leaves and so forth, and get rid of all of that and put in some fresh mulch, and then you have a better start for the plant.
Mike, what's in terms of grasses, particularly in this Piedmont region, well, of course, all across our state, what do you all say when you get a call about what's the best grass to plant in North Carolina?
I think it depends on the
where you are,
the growing area, the growing region, the conditions that you have in your landscape. If you have fairly shady conditions, we don't recommend grass to be planted, because most grasses won't grow with a lot of. Fescue is very popular because it's green most of the year. It has some problems during the summer, but if you water properly, we can have a fairly green lawn year round with fescue and a little bit of bluegrass in there. But we are finding more and more as our water sources get lower, that we need a more drought-tolerant grass. And zoysia, man has zoysia. Centipede is a very good grass because it doesn't require a lot of maintenance.
It doesn't require much fertilizer.
Right, and Bermuda is very popular too.
Now I've noticed that there's a whole new industry of turf grass that people, I see these trucks come by, either they're layered or they're on rolls. This is getting to be a big business, isn't it?
It's huge, and a lot of that research is done here at North Carolina State.
It is, and the turf grass industry is one of the major industries in North Carolina now, and I don't think people realize how many turf farms we do have in this state.
It's all a part of making the home a more attractive place, which also increases the economic value of a residence, doesn't it?
It also increases the economic value of your golf courses. And we have a few of those in this state. And that's one of the reasons that there's an interest in turf grass.
Another big business.
Another large business.
Well, now, Ann, you're known far and wide for camellias. You have 200 varieties in your own lot.
That's right.
I want the audience to look right back of my shoulder. Here's a basket of ones that were cut this morning when you came to join me on this program.
And that's after a freeze the night before last.
The camellia and the rose, two of nature's most beautiful plants.
That's true.
You have them both?
I have them both. I curate the rose garden out here at the Arboretum and have since 1990. So I grow both and do reasonably well at both. Both of them are a lot easier to care for than the public seems to think.
And that's what I wanted to ask you. So many people tell you can't grow roses. They're like children. They take too much time, too much attention. You found that differently?
I found out differently. I found out one thing, that they don't have to be perfect. A rose will bloom and do well if there are a few black spots or if there are a few holes on its foliage. And from 3 feet away, most of us can't see that kind of damage anyway. You have the color and the fragrance there. So I think that people are maligning some plants that they really shouldn't malign. They're a lot easier to take care of than people think they are. And I like them. They overlap. You know, as soon as my camellias have stopped blooming, the roses are starting. So they give me color year round.
I think you have to follow a few rules, basically, for planting either. And as long as you know the right conditions to plant the rose in, plenty of sunlight, don't water the tops of them, just water the soil, for instance, and plant camellias in relatively shady areas. Then you're going to be in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
I want to go back a little bit with you now, Mike. When did you get into radio?
I started in radio actually at North Carolina State at WKNC, doing a little bit of commercial experience hanging around radio stations, but WPTF gave me an opportunity, and God meant for me to be in this position. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gotten a job, because there were a lot of people who wanted to be Bart Rittner's producer on Open Line, and I applied for that job, and I got it, and I've survived 31 years.
Well, you and Mike Blackman and Tom, you're the last of that golden age at WPTF. And,
that's right.
Well, this program is what I think made WPTF so famous. I can still hear Harriet Presley talking to the homemakers at 10 o'clock every morning.
I have luckily met many of those people who made WPTF great. Wally Osley was my boss.
Yeah.
Gary Dornberg was my best friend. Bart Rittner I worked with and loved for many years. Johnny Hood. I never met Charlie Gaddy while he was working there, but Charlie is one of the greats who worked at WPTF. But Tom Kearney, Tony Rigsby.
I used to spot for the generation behind those with Jim Reed, Lee Kirby, and Phil Ellis, and that crowd. We had a wonderful time. And you were a professor of textiles.
That's
How
correct.
in the world you get to be such a proficient gardener?
I had a grandmother who was still gardening at her death at the age of 103. My mother was a gardener, and it was one of those hobbies that it's a great way to get out and get rid of some of your problems. And if you were the female in the textile school with all the men, there were times when I had to get out and kick a few things, and the plants were a good way to get away from that. It's good mental therapy, I think. So it was a hobby, and now it's become an even larger part of my life.
Well, now you and Mike and I all three knew J.C. Ralston. And this place out here is his monument, of course. But
it is.
What all's out here, really? As you drive by, I see trees and I see little pansies. Is it everything?
It's a treasure.
It's a treasure.
North Carolina's gardening center.
It's 8 acres of the best kept secret in North Carolina.
That's really true.
It's not far from the state fairgrounds, not far from Meredith College. We have just received an additional 2 acres of ground out here, which we're going to be developing. But it is a research plot. And it is one that we invite people to come in and see what grows in North Carolina, what new plants are coming online. A lot of the plants that we have out here are plants that are not even available to the public. When JC came to North Carolina, you went into a garden center and you saw camellias and azaleas. And those little green things that you put in front of the house for your basic shrubbery. And he said the plant palette can be larger than that. And so he developed lots of plants. He introduced lots of plants to the people in North Carolina. And there are a lot of us who've been around since the beginning of that, and we want to keep that legacy alive.
Mike, do people who called you reflected that they know about this place, or I know you from time to time tell everybody what's out here, but
we mentioned the Arboretum, the Duke Gardens, the Arboretum at Carolina, and many of the other gardens. We have wonderful public gardens here. It's also a place, Dr. Friday, that homeowners can come and see how a plant is supposed to look.
yeah.
And that helps a great deal, I believe.
I think very often people get a landscape plan and they don't know what the plants look like other than at a nursery. Here
Sure.
you can come in, we've got them labeled, you can see how they grow. There are usually volunteers around here who can tell you how they're taken care of. So it's a wonderful resource for the people of North Carolina.
What's the connection then between this Arboretum here and the one in Asheville, for example?
Absolutely none, really. The Arboretum is in Asheville is part of the Department of Agriculture system. It is developed as a tourist center, really, and a means of getting tourists to come to Western North Carolina. It is essentially funded completely by the state. This, on the other hand, is part of the field laboratory for the College of Agriculture at North Carolina State University. It is run out of the Department of Horticulture. The people who are here are members of the staff of the Department of Horticulture. And so we have a much closer working relationship with horticulture, and the university, the Arboretum in the western part of the state has a better relationship with the Department of Tourism, if you want to look at it that way.
Mike, you ever have people walk up to you when you're out shopping center somewhere and start talking to you about what you said on the radio?
Occasionally, Dr. Friday. Luckily, being on radio, they don't know what I look like. But once in a while, they'll recognize my voice,
Yeah,
and
that's
I get a chance to talk to them. And I love that. I enjoy so much. We get out a great deal, as you know, and go to various businesses and so forth. And we get a lot of folks who come out and they ask questions. They bring their plant problems. They bring their insect problems with live insects, and we just have a great old time.
You find North Carolinians really do respect what they have, don't you? At least I do. Plants and flowers and trees.
I do. You were talking about business, what a big business it is. It's a huge business, and I think you, as a child, look back at the yards in your neighborhood, and I look back at the yards in my hometown of Nashville when I was growing up, and they're nothing like they are now.
No.
People really put a lot of money and time into their landscape, and it's a beautiful thing.
Suppose somebody's watching you here and he's not a gardener, but he's got the time and the means to do something. What advice would you give him? Now, mother of husband or wife or both of them.
Well, one, there are lots of garden clubs around the state that have wonderful educational programs, and get involved in some of that. Go to your local county extension office. North Carolina has a wonderful extension service. And it serves both the urban horticulturist and the farmer. And I think we're most lucky that we have kept the dual interest in North Carolina. But talk to your extension agents, find out about the Master Gardener program in your county. We have them in almost every county in North Carolina. They're available, and learn some of the basics of gardening, meet some other gardeners, and get started that way.
There are leaflets, pamphlets galore at your cooperative extension service all over North Carolina, and there's a plethora of information on the web, World Wide Web. It's incredible, including many of these things. The extension service in each county has a website and links to the North Carolina Cooperative Extension Service, and there's a lot of information there.
No rookie should be timid about this business, should he, Mike?
Well,
Gardening, there is no right and wrong to gardening. There are some things that will do it a little bit better than others, but I never tell anybody how to take care of a plant until I've killed it 3 times.
I've heard that from other gardeners.
And accept the fact that you're not going to be able to do it all. There are lots of things that I cannot grow. I've tried, and I cannot do it.
Well, I hate to say, but we gobbled up all of our time here this morning. It's gone by so swiftly.
It
But
sure has.
thank you both, and I want you to know that there are hundreds of us that listen to you every Saturday morning from WPTF for the 8 to 11, isn't it now?
That is
whole
true.
3
correct.
hours. So, friends, if you want to get the answers, here they are. These wonderful people who give so much to you and me to make our lives more beautiful. Thank you for letting us visit with you this weekend. Until next week then, good night.
Sponsored in part by Wachovia, helping North Carolina people realize their financial goals since 1879. And through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV.